Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the summer session of presenters. Tonight, we're very lucky to have very experienced and interesting people giving presentations tonight. We will have first a presentation from Ivone from Indonesia, and then Rob, who's currently in Bangkok. And then we will be having a discussion between the two of them and asking some questions afterwards. Our topic tonight is ER plus what? So we often, as educators, we want to include extensive reading in our curriculum, but sometimes it can be difficult to know what goes well with extensive reading. How can we get more benefit from the extensive reading by including other elements in the program? So we've got two people to ask and give their points of view and their ideas that might help us all. So we're going to start tonight with Ivone, Francisca Maria Ivone, who is teaching in the Department of English at the, now is it Universitas Negeri Malang?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Indonesia. Apologies for any pronunciation problems. She's very much interested in technology-enhanced language learning, extensive reading, listening, and viewing, and learner autonomy, collaborative learning. And she draws from her own experiences as a language learner and educator, and has been advocating for the integration of that technology in language teaching and learning. And she teaches extensive reading courses and also teaches courses on English language teaching and technology in language teaching. So plenty of experience to draw upon. And perhaps if you'd like to take it away, Ivone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So good evening, everyone. It's still afternoon here in Indonesia, approaching evening. Right, so let me share my screen. All right, so today I'll be talking about me first. So this is Indonesia, and right now, right in that orange dot. So this is the city of Malang in Indonesia, which is located in East Java. And as Sandra earlier said, I'm from Universitas Negeri Malang. Now, today I'm going to take a look at ER not as just activities, but I'm going to look into it as a developmental impact. So impact on students and then teachers as well as classrooms. So all the three, and I'll be talking about ER plus as multipliers basically, because I want to take a look at the multiplication of, doing ER into the development of literacy, equity, purpose, and as well as agency. So this, it is about multiplying what learners, teachers, and also classroom can become through ER. Yeah. And in doing so, I'm going to take a look at some pairings. So I'm going to pair ER with something, but probably not ER with an activity, ER with something else. ER with complementary approaches, and then ER with tools as well as conditions that make ER thrive. So first of all, I will take a look at literacy trajectory. We often talk about ER in the context of literacy as a skill, but to me, this is more as a trajectory, because when I talk to my students, we talk about them, learning to read from not reading anything in English into reading more and then to reading better. So these are the things that I often encounter when I talk to my students at the beginning and at the end of a semester. They talk about, I can't read English. That's the beginning of the semester. And, when we progress, they say something about, I just read a whole book in English. So this is something that they haven't done before. Yeah, in Indonesia, although English is taught as a, a compulsory subject starting from junior high school, this is like year 7. But by the time they graduate from senior high school, most Indonesians don't speak English and they don't read English books. So an ER course at a university level is something new to them and something big because it basically gives them that springboard to move forward with their literacy. So I feel the need to, talk about trajectories here because ER is, to me, to be embedded into long-term culture. It's not just a short-term intervention. In our classes, usually we talk about, ER as just one semester intervention, but then we sort of don't really talk about what happens after the semester. So ER should be grown as a habit, as a motivational support is needed at the very beginning because students are not comfortable or confident reading in the target language. So in the long view, this is about how ER builds learners who are independent and then critical and also engaged, curious and engaged. So some examples from this particular concept of ER plus, what is some of the examples that I do with my students in class. So ER plus meaningful and fun activities to encourage students to regard reading as a meaningful, fun activity. So every single week in class, we would do different activities. Well, later I can share with you, some of the activities that we do in our classes. And in addition to that, we also do ER plus reading logs. So sometimes this is student-led, sometimes it's teacher-led. This is to help them to track growth over time. And also ER plus level progression. So this is about encouraging students to move upward and forward. So at the beginning, our students would learn something like their own level at a particular point in when they start their semester. And then they should go up level when they read their graded readers. That's level progression. And we also do more reading. So like our semester is a 16-week course. So 4 weeks would be reading 6,000 word in a week. And then second week, 7,000. Third week, 8,000. And then approaching the end of the semester, the last month, sorry, not week, month. I'm talking about month. So the first month, 6,000, second month, 7,000, and then third month, 8,000, and last month, 9,000. So they are actually progressing with their goals. And this is something that works with my students because at the beginning, they don't feel like they can read a lot, but approaching the end, they find things to be a lot easier and therefore they need, more words to read. And the last one is ER plus self-reflection. This is to encourage students to assess themselves at the end of a semester because usually when we end a course, we just leave it like that, right? We don't ask our students to think about what they have done during the semester and what they are going to do after they finish the semester and after they pass the ER course. So this is the first one. The second pairing is ER with equity in multimodal classroom. So we were talking about Indonesia. Many classrooms in Indonesia are not well equipped. So we struggle with resources and then facilities. So we need to be able to include everyone in this. We have diverse learners that need to read text that suit their level of proficiency and also text format that suits their interest. Some students, when they talk about what they read on daily basis, they read comics, webtoons, and things like that. They never read like a book. So we need to also take into account what they like and what they are able to do. And to make sure that we use minimal equipment and also provide flexible access to support students from rural or or in under-resourced contexts, as well as diverse learners' needs. So, for example, we had in the previous year, we had a student who could not read on screen. So we had to give her, special access to books for the whole semester so that she can also read like the others. So this kind of thing that we have to deal with. So ER needs to be able to cater for equity. And because Indonesia is a multilingual country, so students come to class already speaking, two, three languages. So we also need to embrace things like translanguaging or code switching. And this is for additional support in multilingual contexts like what we have in Indonesia. So when I pair ER with equity in multimodal classroom, what I'm thinking about is ER is about making reading work for all learners and not just the fluent few. Some of the examples from my classrooms is ER plus L1 summaries or discussion to support comprehension in EFL context. So sometimes I encounter students at the level of A1 or A2, so they are not able to express themselves and they feel like some students dominate, discussion. And in that particular context, I would encourage them to use L1 and combine it with L2. And this is the second one also happens a lot in Indonesia. So ER plus community libraries, we see that teachers put simple, small bookshelf in classrooms, and then students fill that up with their books, or the teacher can have access to books in parks and also malls and community centers. We find community libraries. And the next one, ER plus shared digital resources access. So again, access is an issue in Indonesia. So when we're talking about reading in rural area, probably they don't have access to the internet. So we need to make everything offline. So we can get things from the internet and then put it in a PDF file and share it in a drive. But issues like copyright and things like that, we have to deal with that on daily basis. And the next one, ER with same stories, different levels, to make sure every student has access to the same story. So I also do this with my students. We are lucky that we have collections of books back home in our university that, for example, Oxford has a story about Anne of Green Gables at the level of B1, and then different publisher has it in a different level. So we try to make sure that everyone gets the chance to read the same story so that they can talk about the same story. And the next one, ER plus same stories but different formats. So we use like videos and audiobooks, printed books, comics, and things like that to cater for various types of learners and learning contexts. And the next one, ER plus same story, different languages. So the last one, I want to put it there because this is based on personal experience. When I learn to speak English or to read English, I didn't read English books at first. I read the books in Bahasa Indonesia and then I read the English version of it so that I can, make sense of the story first before I read it in a foreign language. And I found that very helpful. And sometimes I also suggest this to my students. Okay, so going to the third one, ER plus multimodal resource curation. So this is what a lot of people are excited about. Today we talk about digital technology all the time. ER plus digital technology, though, doesn't mean flashy apps or expensive tools. Because we usually, when I go to schools and talk to teachers and then talk to them about extensive reading, they always ask like, what's the most up-to-date apps, the most trendy and things like that. But we rarely talk about actually curating for the needs of our students. because sometimes the most impactful step in curating digital libraries or basically using free readers, audiobooks, or or creating story sharing groups. And in some places, this is also something that we can do. In places where connectivity is limited, ER plus digital technology might look like just a USB with lots of level readers shared across devices. And to me, it's not about the technology, it's about the ecosystem in which everyone gets access to, resources, reading resources. So examples of ideas in this particular pairing, simple websites that can be accessed offline, and then a G Drive folder of graded readers or graded audiobooks. This is quite similar to what we are doing now in Indonesia with the help of Rob. We create a GRAIN, so Graded Reader Author Network for Indonesia, and we are writing books for Indonesian students, and we'll later make it available for everyone to be able to read. So the idea is there. And it can also be in the form of a USB containing reading text and resources, or we can involve AI to create digital books or audiobooks. So the next one is ER and curriculum synergy. So I'm going to use an example to explain this. So using ER for character education and global citizenship, environmental education, or anything else related to that. So last year, I was given a book by Professor Maeda, and the book is this. I don't know whether you can see it or not. It's Identity. Now, in this book, there are 3 different stories from 3 different perspectives, and the issue is about identity. When I used this book with my students for the first time last semester, and this book is actually very powerful for reflection kind of thing. So after reading the book, we talk about the different characters in the book with their ideas, and then we talk about them. So we talk about identity, and we talk about how that influenced them as a student, as university student, and how it's going to develop their global citizenship and things like that. So things like this will also, very helpful. Now, using ER to support content learning. This is also something that we did a few years back during the pandemic. So we trained teachers to use ER and combine it with science, and then social science, and then language, bahasa Indonesia, and other things. So it is actually possible to synergize ER with the curriculum. But ER should be a powerful ally, a quiet but powerful ally to the curriculum, not just an addition. With the condition in Indonesia, and I'm sure that the condition in many countries is also quite similar. We put ER as an addition to the curriculum, but not working together with the curriculum. So in the example, we'll take a look at some of the things that we can do to pair ER with the curriculum. So ER is supposed to support not only academic, but also values-based outcomes. So when we see, let's take a look at these examples. So ER plus social studies. We can read biographies of key figures and then make connection with, make a map of connection to national history lesson, and then think which parts are missing or which parts are in synchronized. And we can talk about ER plus science themes, for example, graded readers in relation to environment, problems, health, or invention, and ER plus character education. So we can pair reading with reflective writing. So I actually use one story by Michael Lacey Freeman, Egghead, and I'm sure that we are all familiar with his work. So we talk about bullying, in class and talk about, empathizing with other people's problem and things like that. Okay, going to the next one. I also see this as a very good pairing. So ER with real world purposes. Real world, connecting ER with real life activities so that reading has a purpose. This is a very important concept because we know that learners are more motivated when their reading leads to real communication. So the real world purposes here is when reading becomes part of students' social and communicative lives. So these are some of the things that we can do, and I've done some of them. ER plus peer book reviews. So these are the things that they can share in class, social media, or school walls, so they can, like rate review of a book and then see whether others are interested. And then we are doing book buddy programs. So this is students reading stories aloud to younger kids, and also they rewrite stories for less proficient language learners. So this is like making the simplified version of stories that they read. And the next one, ER plus book swap. So students would need to buy a book, something that they like, and then they, exchange the book with everyone in the classroom so that everyone gets to read a lot of books. And the next one is ER and book clubs. We've done this one during the pandemic as well. So we get together with lecturers from different universities, and then we get together online with our students to read the same books and then discuss and then do some other activities together online. So that will give them real world purposes for reading. And the last one is ER and teacher agency. Well, we rarely talk about ER in the context of us teachers, but this is like a reflection. The last one is a reflection of me as a language learner and teacher. I found, and I'm sure that many teachers find ER intimidating at first because we don't really know how to deal with it, especially when we come from, test-focused systems and have no ER experience. So things get really difficult. But I see that ER programs thrive when teachers have the freedom and confidence to tailor the program based on the needs of our students. And in every successful ER programs that I have experienced, teachers grow into new roles. So I learned to be facilitator, mentors, and co-readers, things that I haven't done before in my other classes when I teach other courses. And hold on a second. Yeah. So teaching courses for the past 5 years give me the permission to trust my learners, to let go of control. Because I don't, I don't need to teach when I teach ER courses, and also to rediscover my reading joy, because listening to them talking to each other about stories gives me curiosity of wanting to read the same story and then wanting to read other stories similar to that. So examples of this agency would be teachers designing projects. It can be book corners, student-made book trailers, or ER-themed bulletin boards, or anything. But this is based on the condition of our own classrooms and based on our style as teachers. And the next one, ER plus local adaptation. Teachers in rural Indonesia using translated or adapted folk tales in simple English. And this is also the work of the initiative that we do with GRAIN. Later on, perhaps we can talk about GRAIN. And the last one is ER plus cross-level monitoring. So older students lead or guided ER sessions for younger ones. And because I'm teaching at a university with a program, teacher training program, so this is something that our students need to do. So they need to learn how to do this mentoring. And that's what we are trying to do as well. So this is my closing. ER plus what is not just about what we read and do after reading. It's also about what we put around it. You know, the time that we put there, equity that we are trying to create, and then content, access, autonomy, teacher, and also purposes. So if we go back to ER plus what? ER is whatever plus whatever helps our learners grow intellectually, linguistically, emotionally, and also socially. And the last one, ER plus multiplication of impact of what I've already talked about, multiplication of literacy, equity, purpose, and also agency. And this is across time, context, and community. Okay, and that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's so much there that I'm so glad that we're recording this, because I really want to go back and listen to everything again. So from that very expansive presentation, Rob Waring is next. Now, of course, I could say Rob really doesn't need any introduction, but I will try very briefly to, he's pretty much a pioneer of ER in Japan, has been working, promoting extensive reading for many, many years, founding board member of the Extensive Reading Foundation, I believe also on the Korean English ER Association, and perhaps something in the Middle East as well.
The Middle East, yeah.
Yes, written
Taiwan, yeah.
Countless graded readers. I was trying to look on my database and there's just too many wonderful texts. Also behind EFL Technologies with ercentral.com and wordlearner.com. So behind that as well. Currently in Bangkok as a visiting professor at Thammasat University. And I think that's probably a very, very brief introduction to what is a lot more. But thank you for being with us tonight, Rob, and up to you from here on.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandy. That's great. It's that sounded like a very impressive person. I want to meet him. Okay. So thank you very much, Ivone. That was typically wonderful. There's a bit of overlap between the two of us. And so I've been playing around with my slides a little bit in the background to alter them fractionally and take a slightly different direction. And I have a whole list of questions we can go through later. So let me start at the start here. So when I first saw this ER plus what, for me, there were two different ways that you could interpret this. The first is, what is the sort of stuff that supports extensive reading? What kind of activities can follow up, or what kind of assessment practices can we have? So within the sort of what you might call the ER ecoverse, where you've got extensive reading and the activities and assessment and so on, is supporting the extensive reading itself. The other way to think about that, which I think is what Sandra was saying in her or her thought, was what should be part of an overall language program as well as the ER. So there's two ways I thought that we could look at it. And that second question is where we have extensive reading plus, let's say, some coursework, maybe a vocab program, real life simulations where we're doing skills work, and plus. You all guys all know that stuff. So I got to look a little bit at that second view, which is, I think, is what Ivone also had done. Also, when I saw this, I was a little bit intrigued. There are some questions that come from this. Is ER plus, and a question I would probably have for Ivone later, maybe, so give you time to think about it. Is it best conceptualized this as a framework, or is it a mindset? Ivone mentioned culture. Is it a set of practices? So if we're going to have this term ER plus that's going to develop over a period of time, we probably need to understand the construct of what that means. And we're already struggling with the definition of extensive reading. Extensive reading is used in so many different ways by so many different people, and maybe we can get back to that later. It's a struggle that I've had for a long time, try to identify what the core elements of extensive reading are. And the reason that's important is because if you're talking about extensive reading and I'm talking about extensive reading, it makes sense to talk about the same thing. So just yesterday, I was talking with the extensive reading group in Italy, and their definition of extensive reading is what Ivone called, which is guided reading, which is, let's take a graded reader, everybody read the same one, and we read 3 of them a semester, and then we just do lots of comprehension questions and discussion afterwards. That for them is the definition of extensive reading. So, and I believe in Spain, that's often the practice as well, where we have one text which we do as class reading, or what Ivone called guided reading. So we do have a bit of a problem defining ER. And if we now add the ER plus on top of that, we have a danger of trying to work out what that actually means in terms of definition. So a bit of a word of warning for us there. And also in terms of the mental constructs, does it involve noticing, involvement load, depth of processing, blah, 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 blah. Another question that came up was, how can ER plus be meaningfully integrated into a curriculum without compromising the core ER principles? And I think this is key here too. When we think about extensive reading and we seem to add it to a program, and now we're going to add something to the adding of the extensive reading, where's the line between integrating extensive reading and intrusion into ER principles? So again, this is a somewhat working on this definition business. And does the concept of ER plus risk diluting the original philosophy of extensive reading? You know, which is reading for pleasure, for autonomy, and for speed, and all the rest of it, right? All we're familiar with that. So how do we avoid schoolifying ER by adding these activities? Because the assumption is ER plus is set within a pedagogical framework, a school, let's say, right? Because ER doesn't have to be done with a school, you can just do it for yourself. So if we're going to add these plus activities, naturally assumes that ER happens within the school environment. So how do we sort of try to avoid making ER a school thing, and only a school thing, which you give up once you've graduated high school or university? And how can we guard against ER becoming a vague catch-all? So these were the sort of things that were in my mind as I saw this term. And also I was intrigued that, you know, what does it mean here? It's a little bit ambiguous in a way. And I think part of the reason we're having this discussion is so we can start to clarify, to discuss what ER plus might in fact mean. Is it activities after reading? Does it mean integration with other skills? Does it mean adding tech, critical thinking skills, plus a standard course? So teachers and researchers may interpret it differently, leading to some uncertainty about what it actually means. So the next one is, as I was saying before, that balance between freedom and structure. So ER typically, if we're talking about this, let's just say the more Crasher-Knight, more Richard Day sort of definition of ER, which is it's all about you. Read what you like, when you like, put it down if you don't like it. You don't have to be tested. If you take the more purist view, the sort of more Crasher-Knight, more Richard Day, Bamford perspective. Reading for pleasure at your own level, no tests, no tasks. Right, so that's the freedom side. Then the structure side adds activities. It makes ER possibly feel like schoolwork, so watch out for that. The next one is the pedagogical justification for this. So many post-reading activities, they feel engaging, but which ones are actually help learning? And I think we need to be careful about that. It's very easy to just do stuff, but you know, what are the aims of what we're trying to do pedagogically? What are we trying to get kids to do if we're going to do these plus activities? Is it going to support vocabulary growth, comprehension, fluency, motivation? How do we justify them? Since we don't have a definition of ER plus what, it's very hard if we were to do some research on this because we don't have a proper construct to justify them with evidence. So I think there's a whole lot that we need to deal with here. And contextual challenges. We talked about rural Indonesia before, Japanese high schools we're familiar with. Not everything's going to work in one context and the other. So it needs to be localized very much, as Ivone had said, due to class sizes, resources, student attitudes. And that's exactly what she was talking about. The third one is assessment tensions. Teachers often feel pressured to assess reading outcomes. Assess is the word here. And that could be, we could assess them formally through a test, or some sort of activities we look at, or we can just evaluate them a little bit more modestly, like they seem to have improved their speaking skills, they seem to have improved their reading fluency, their confidence, and so on. So, how do we look at this balance between assessment and evaluation? And Ivone talked about light touch assessment, and so it's great to have that, but how do we keep it constructive and not too intrusive? Also, many teachers are unsure probably how to handle ER in general, and now we add plus elements to it might complicate things. So we do have issues here. I think we're talking about an advanced group of people who are well versed with what extensive reading means in terms of, let's call it the big tent view of extensive reading, which we have. The audience today is very much in that realm. I think we can really look at this and talk about the nuances. But when we sort of take this term and we sort of just throw it out at a conference somewhere where people are new to extensive reading, we have to be a little bit careful, as Ivone was warning us about what it actually refers to. And it can seem overwhelming to teachers, not only learning about extensive reading, but also extensive reading plus. So there's issues with training there as well. So this all comes back to defining what ER is and ER plus what might be. But I want to step back a little bit and look at how we would place the ER and the overall picture of language learning. If you cast your eye on this research, you can probably notice some of the canon of, let's just say, language acquisition, second language acquisition theory. And these are some of the core studies, the core ideas that underlie our field. And if we look at that lot of material en masse as one thing, what do we draw out of those 17, 18 pieces of research plus all the others? Well, these are some of the things that we want to have in our language classroom. Focus on the form. We want to make sure that the material is scaffolded. We build on previous knowledge. We want to try and control language complexity. We don't want to have too much, we don't want to have difficult things before easy things. We want to have the easy before the difficult. We have to, of course, recycle, repeat, and practice, massive amounts of input. Of course, we have to focus on meaning-focused learning and interactions. Useful stuff and more frequent stuff before less useful and rare stuff. Obviously, develop fluency. And all the other things you see down the right there, I'm not going to go through them all, just cast your eye down. I would say that all of us here today would probably say these are great things to have into a language program. And probably some more that I've missed. And so these are the things we want, essentially. When we look at the types of things that we actually do in our classrooms, I'm talking about my experience of traveling throughout Asia, in particularly the typical classroom in the back end of, let's say, Laos, or the back end of Thailand or Vietnam, or maybe in Indonesia. What are the kinds of things that we're doing? Well, predominantly it's our course book, right? And we might have some grammar activities, some word cards, some of the activities you hear teaching with the teacher at the front of the classroom. We may be reading books, we may be chatting, and so on. So these are some of the things we're doing, some better, some places better than others, but this is a sort of overview of what we're doing. But quite often what happens, certainly in my experience in Asia, and I visited well over 100 schools, and you talk to teachers and their general view of language teaching. If you look at these sorts of principles that I think we need to have, what we tend to find is that some of this stuff is being done quite well. We're quite good at focusing on the forms, teaching the grammar, teaching the vocabulary. We scaffold it, so we build on previous learning a little bit. Not quite so well, but we try. We control language complexity. We teach easy stuff before more difficult stuff. And we tend to teach useful stuff before recent stuff. But very often, a lot of the other stuff is missing from our standard courses. And this is the problem. And this is where I think ER comes in, or ER plus could come in. So when I look at our sort of industry and I think, what are we actually doing well and we're not doing well? There's quite a lot of stuff we have a problem with. And we overemphasize form-focused learning. We critically insufficient input. We all know that to get to the advanced level, you need about 4 million words to get to the advanced level. If you add up the words totally in all the course book students in Japan at least get, let's say at middle school and senior high, add them all up, double them again, you're only talking about 400,000 words. And so it's, absolutely clear from that the outcome will be that students are simply not going to get enough language. So we have a sort of a teach and drop approach. Each unit is doing something different. Relatively poor planning. We don't fight the forgetting curve. A lot of the stuff we put into the course book and syllabus is somewhat random. Ivone mentioned that people grab things from the internet, often without a principle. And we have to be very careful not just grabbing things and just, oh, that looks good, and let me throw that in there without some underlying principles, those 20-odd principles I mentioned before. You have to have a reason to put it in there from an educational perspective, rather than just, oh, we're doing a unit on transport, let me find a vocab activity on transport. We need to do better than that. What we do find, a lot of the standard courses that we do teach are relatively low cognitive, emotional, and social cultural engagement. We need to fix that. And random vocabulary section, that's something I'll come back to later. We're not at all good at systematic vocabulary selection and also on systematic vocabulary learning. And that's a huge problem. I think probably the thing that's missing from our language programs is systematic, intentional word learning. So what I did, just for a little bit of fun here, I decided, how would you design a foreign language course to guarantee students become demotivated and hate English, right? So ChatGPT said, please don't do this, right? But I just thought, well, we'd have a look at, and these are some of the things that it came up with, how to kill our students, right? And you could just cast your eye down that list. Too much grammar, ignore the leads, needs and interests, minimize interaction, provide incomprehensible input, ignore the cultural context, isolate language skills. And interestingly, if you go to most classrooms in Asia, this is happening every single day. And when I present this list here, I did it in Bangladesh just a couple of weeks ago. I did it in Vietnam before that, and people laugh, because they see themselves in this. They see a lot of what they're doing is this sorts of stuff. So, we then see, quite a lot of our students become demotivated. And so what we tend to say is, oh, my students are so unmotivated. They don't work hard. They're unmotivated. They don't understand the topic. Their English level's too low. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding. And I think it's a fundamental error. In fact, it's, to be honest, quite insulting to our students that we say these things about them. And the reason I say that is because students will work hard if they feel this course is useful and achievable. And we have to have the ER plus activities make them useful and have to be achievable. Students, we say, are not unmotivated, but they often choose to be in our courses, particularly at the university level. They don't understand the topic. Well, no, that's not the case. Typically what happens is we've given them something that we haven't prepared them for, like go and read this and answer the questions, but they haven't understood the topic before we give them some questions, or the English level is too low. And this is the one that really gets me. No, it's not that their level's too low. It's the text is too difficult. That's the problem. And we have to be very aware of our own role in making students unmotivated, because the root of the problem often is the text is inappropriate or the task is inappropriate. So I think ultimately we need to stop blaming our students. We tend to put the blame on our students and say, oh, there's no one motivated. Why is this? Well, stop doing that, because I think as teachers, we need to take responsibility, because we are the ones who's causing the unmotivation, the demotivation. We need to look at ourselves a bit more, the system, the curriculum, the approach that we're taking. And I think something like having a clear definition of what ER plus might be would certainly help that. So my challenge is, instead of saying, why are my students so unmotivated, we need to really think at ourselves, what did we do as an industry to actually demotivate our students? Because the responsibility lies with us as teachers. Students don't come to class unmotivated. We cause demotivation. And so we have to be very careful of what we're doing. And so I hope that the ER plus approach will help us find a way through that. So what we do know is one of the principles we mentioned before is that we need to, over time, knowledge will increase, and we can do that with our course book. But we also know that that knowledge is going to be lost. We need to bring it back again. It's going to be lost, bring it back again, and so on and so on. And we need to do that with extensive reading. We're all familiar with that. So we definitely need to have the plus means keep our course books, but add our extensive reading. But there are various types of extensive reading. Here, I've just listed a few: free voluntary extensive reading, sustained silent reading, guided reading, integrated reading, and so on. So again, we have a definition of ER here. What do we do when we're talking about extensive reading? All of them have slightly different nuances in different situations. And so just to be aware that we don't have a single thing called ER, at least let's just say from the pedagogical perspective. A research perspective, I think we can probably pin down to a definition. But from a pedagogical perspective, it is so difficult to pin down. So if we do have extensive reading, what we tend to find is not only do we have that, we have all the other stuff is added with extensive reading. And that's one of the beauties of having this extensive reading plus. So we need to be clear what those activities would be that we're going to add in. So from my perspective, ER plus would also involve critical thinking. We want to have activities that guide learners to question, compare, justify, create, evaluate, and so on. And the reading from input-based learning is a springboard to intellectual growth. And this is something that Ivone touched on. So well-designed ER plus activities can and should push students to analyze, evaluate, and infer. And here are just a few examples for evaluative, inferential, and argumentation. So we want to shift the learner away from just absorbing the ideas, in where we have this traditional view that reading is seen as a passive ability, passive skill. And of course, it's anything other than that. It's actually very much an active skill. You're actively constructing the ideas on the page in your head and rewiring your network depending on what's coming to you through your eye. And so we need to challenge them as well. We also have to develop metacognitive questioning, where teachers can structure ER plus discussions around open-ended questions. So here's just 3 of them that you could ask, and you're all familiar with these types of questions. So metacognitive thinking, thinking about your thinking here. And all of these other skills, all these other activities at the bottom there, all can help the metacognitive development of the students. ER plus, we need to build into the definition of ER plus multiple perspectives. Again, Ivone touched on this. I think if we have plus here, that would include not just material relevant for my cultural situation, but also other cultural situations. Look at other values, look at other viewpoints. I think it's a critical part of plus is building the whole learner, not just simply reflecting our own culture. And unfortunately, there's a movement in 2 or 3 countries nowadays to sort of be more introspective, where we sort of like, let's look at our sort of nationalist values and promote our education through our nationalist values, what we think is part of our country. What are the core principles? Let's have our education just to develop that, rather than have that plus a global perspective. So there's tend to be a bit of backtracking now towards the more nationalistic sorts of views we see in Asia. So it's important to have that for cultural literacy and empathy, and we need to have learners invite learners to compare this to their own country. The problem with that is that you have to have some understanding of the other country to be able to answer other than anything at a stereotypical level. So that's a challenge. So the types of activities we could involve would be, and I've categorized these not in sort of individual tasks, which Ivone had done directly, but the titles will be create transformation tasks. And here's just a few examples of transformation tasks. So you rework a text into another form. That I think is a great skill to develop from extensive reading material. Create a new ending, adapt the story, build synthesis, and try to get to the higher end of Bloom's taxonomy. Yeah. Another type is collaborative extension activities. Again, students work together to build something. Group work, character relationship maps. So these are the sorts of things that you might work together, alternative endings, where you would collaborate together to come up with and co-construct the meaning through teamwork. Also, personalization and connection. That's another one, again, Ivone had touched on. How do we connect to our own lives? This goes back to a point I was making a minute or 2 ago. Introspection, thinking about this and developing yourself as a person. What would you do in the situation, and so on. Multimodal responses, again, something you've already touched on, responding in different media. So read and then draw, write a comic, or even read comics and then write a story about it. Videos and audio recordings, Ivone mentioned. Performances and role plays is another one. Digital storytelling tools, things like you can use quite a few of the digital tools which are available now. And build their strengths and preferences, but also at the same time, allow them to have some new skills. And particularly critical and analytical reflection. I think this is really the key for us, is this critical side, critical thinking side of education. I mean, if you look at the very basic things that we should leave our kids with at the end of their education, would be the ability to think well. And we don't know what the future is going to bring. We absolutely don't know. 10 years, 5 years down the line, we just simply don't know what kind of jobs are going to be available, what skills are going to be needed. And if we create some learners which are not able to think critically and analyze well, then they're not going to be able to deal with whatever the world throws at them in the coming decades. So it's critically important that we really, really focus on these skills, because honestly, quite a lot of the stuff you learn in school and university, you're going to forget. I mean, do you remember much of your history class, your geography class, your math class? Quite a lot of that's just gone now. The remnants of that are critical thinking, analytical reflection skills. And we all know, with AI in its current use by students, their instant knee-jerk reaction to go to AI to get the information that they need is leading to students who simply cannot think very well and won't be able to think for themselves. And there's actually a movement of young kids nowadays, the younger kids, some of whom are saying, thank God I don't have to think anymore. AI can do that for me. And that is a real danger. So we have to have people who can think, because that's the only way we're going to solve some of the problems we're facing as a community. Intertextual projects. So here we can read between texts. So we could look at several texts about justice or identity, several texts about sci-fis and mysteries. We can connect text to their author and so on. So I think we have intertextual projects, I think would be a great thing to do, where we can look beyond an individual book. And also production for a real audience, not just, perform in the class. So you might give book reviews, make a podcast or a video book talk that you can leave for other people outside your class, social media summaries or blog posts, again, trying to get the stuff out of the class and have it for a real audience. In one of my classes when I was in Japan, we were making a guide to Okayama, my hometown, for foreigners. So there's used to be 10 or 15, 20 videos where they would read about their own town, and then they would make a video about various aspects of it. So that's sort of where I am right now with my ideas. And so let's call it a day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, absolutely wonderful. There's just so much so much meat on the bone. I'm sure we're going to be chewing for a while, if you know what I mean. Now, I'm very curious to see now, Rob and Ivone, you've both seen each other's presentations. Yeah, please, we would like to hear what you have to think after having seen these things.
Can I have the first question?
Oh, yeah.
If you don't mind. I want to lead off with my question, my very first question, which was, you mentioned mindset. Beg your pardon, you mentioned culture. And I said, well, should it be a framework or a mindset, a set of practices? What's your thought? If you were to, let's say, work towards a definition of ER+, and I think we need to do that. If we're going to throw this new term out, we need to start working with a definition of some kind and have a conceptual framework for that. So what's your thought? I'm still thinking about mine. So if you don't have an answer, that's okay.
I'm also still thinking about mine, because when I received an invitation to, discuss about ER+, the first thing that came into my head was like ER, so reading plus something, like follow-up activities. But then I thought, like, it's not supposed to be that simple, right? So then I think about it further, and now I start to think about not just the reading activities, not just the set of tasks, but more like a mindset, of looking at ER as a springboard of literacy development. Of
So the reason I gave those slides there about the list of various attributes, what I think of a successful language program should have, is I think my view would be we need to sort of step back and look at those principles. And as I said, there may be more than the 20 or so that I put there, and then sort of think, okay, these are all desirable in our class, to larger and lesser extents, depending on age and need and so on. And what is that framework? What's the basis of that framework we need to have? And where does ER or EL or e-watching fit into that? And I'm not quite clear in my own mind. I have some ideas and I can probably throw them around, but I too would like to probably see it ER plus should be based on those principles that I mentioned. Have the extensive reading plus have the activities that fill out that table of stuff, where we have social cultural engagement, we have cognitive engagement, social cultural values are in there, respect for differences, autonomy, all the activities. I think we need that framework, that sort of set of principles that is, let's call it principled eclecticism, where we can pick and choose from those depending on what we need today, right? And then, but also have an idea over a longer period of time. And every course should be able to have a fairly decent amount of all of those principles built into it. The challenge with that is you need a really experienced teacher to be able to pull that off, who really understands all the various aspects. And that's not something that you're going to get early on with people. I mean, all of us here have been teachers, some of us for decades. And someone once said to me, you don't really understand teaching until you've been doing it 15, 20 years. So this is not possible, really, for the people who are new to the game. So we have a bit of a problem there, right? You can't train people to instantly be ready to be able to pick and choose from all these various activities and resources and have them available for you the day you start teaching. I think that was a huge ask for our industry. So I'm being somewhat sort of ambitious here, but I think it's something we could move towards.
Yeah, I agree, Rob. And it's going to be very difficult because of the constraints that we have within, the institution that we work in. Like in the ER course, well, I'm going to, again, take my example, my own class. We need to come up with lesson plans, right? So, and we need to come up with ideas of how to assess our students. Are we going to do it lightly? Yeah. So things like that, like how do we deal with that? Even experienced teachers will have problems dealing with this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite an issue. Okay, that's my first question. Do you have one for me?
Yeah.
I have a few for you. Go on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Right. Hold on a second. Yeah.
Go on,
so I'm interested in the chart that you earlier showed us. So the chart in which you show us that we learn something and then we lose a bit of it and then we relearn things. And there's some sort of deep learning there. So in Indonesia, there's a hype now that we are not doing Merdeka Belajar anymore. We are doing deep learning. So how do you see ER fits into this whole concept of deep learning?
Let me just then just find that slide for you for a second. I want to go back over that because actually there was a point that I mentioned that I didn't get to. Let me just share that slide with everybody one more time. Where are we there? Okay, so here I'm talking about the initial learning. Let's just say intentional learning through, say, a course book or some sort of controlled activities would lead to learning. So let's just say in a very simple way, look, here's 20 new words, or here's a new piece of grammar, or here are some idioms or whatever. So we have that learning in our course. But as we all know, the way that course books are structured, that most of the stuff that happens in Unit 1 doesn't appear anywhere else in the course book. We tend to have a teach and drop sort of approach, and I can back that up with data. The average new word that's taught in course books is only met 2 times, and that's nowhere near enough for learning. So when we do teach something in our course books, and there's nothing wrong with course books, please don't get me wrong, I love course books. I think they're great for structure. It provides a conduit for learning. Yeah. But unless we have material that's built on top of that, unless we have Unit 3, which is the present simple tense, unless we have lots and lots of stuff practicing the present simple tense with extensive reading, it's going to be forgotten. And again, we have to make sure that it comes back again and again and again. And the extensive reading is the one that really builds that. So level 1 readers would have the very simple vocabulary. Level 2 would have slightly more difficult vocabulary, slightly more difficult grammar. Level 3 would have more difficult grammar, more difficult vocabulary, and so on and so on. You're all familiar with that. So I think that overall, when we look at that, I think we can see that we need to build on previous learning. We have to make sure that we have the intentional learning plus the incidental learning. And the incidental learning is going to build not only a deeper understanding of the core meaning of the word, let's say at the form meaning relationship, where you're just matching the sound of a word to its spelling and its meaning, which is what a lot of learning does. But you also need to see how it works with its collocations, how it works with, say, colligations, its lexical partners, its whether it's polite or rude, or what register it's in, what domain that it comes from. How does it live with other words? Because we all know that if you take a simple word and you just change the noun, it's going to come up with a completely different concept in your head. So we can say something like to play a game, play a CD, play with someone's hair. To play the fool, to play with someone's mind, all bring up completely different networks in your head. And it's not a simple process of just learn play. You have to be able to understand the context of how play is used in multiple contexts. So this is about deepening the language knowledge. Now, there's one more slide I wanted to show you, and I'm going to try and jump to that now. Just hang on to your hat a second while I do that. I'll have to move a couple of things around. Where are we? There we are. Okay, so I have my... Oh, I seem to have lost that window. Okay, never mind. I'm going to zoom all the way forward. Sorry, folks. There we go. Oops. Oh, I just lost it. It went out. Okay, back to where we were, folks. Where are we? Let me just go back. I did have the slide ready. I just jumped to it too fast. So I'll need to pull out. I'll go down to here. All right. So this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit. I'm sure you're all familiar with spaced repetition. Anybody here not familiar with spaced repetition? If you speak now or forever hold your peace. So spaced repetition briefly says that, as we saw in the previous diagram, that we have the initial learning, but we're going to have forgetting. So we need to meet the word again soon in order for it to be retained. And but you might meet the word again, say half an hour later, but by tomorrow it's starting to be forgotten. The day after it's forgotten even more. So we need to bring it back at sort of systematic spaces. And what this diagram is showing here is this is for intentional learning. And this is a thing I think that's missing from our language courses in general. And there are so few courses or programs in Asia that systematically deal with the intentional learning of vocabulary through whether it's flashcards or some sort of an app. And what it does here, this is an example with flashcards. So you start with a word. Let's see if I can put up an annotation thing. Hang on, I don't need to annotate. I need. There. There's the button. There we go. So we start off here. So you learn a word here, you get it right, it moves forward a box. So you've got a flashcard, for example, English on one side, Japanese on the other. Do I know this word? Turn it over. Yes, I do. Great. Move to the next box. Or no, put it back into the same box. And again, you pick this word up. Do you know it? Yes or no? Move it forward. Do I know it? Yes or no? Move it forward. And anytime you don't know it, you go all the way back to the start. And the idea is that what's happening is you'll notice that the word is met here, and then maybe an hour later you meet it again. And because you're learning on these words, after you've learned all of the box in box 1 and you've moved them to box 2, you go back to the beginning and start again. So the idea here is that you're going backwards and forwards through these boxes all the time, systematically. But what you'll notice is that the distance, the time it takes to go from here to here is shorter than this one. It takes longer and longer and longer. So you meet these words as a sort of, well, here they've got down the number of days, but at a certain space distance, it's distributed and spaced. And this is the work of people like Ebbinghaus, Pimsleur, Leitner, and Mondrian, who you see there. And there is no question, there is absolutely no question. This is the fastest way to learn vocabulary. There is no question over this. The research is crystal clear that there is no competition for this. And I need to qualify that, because what I'm talking about here is only that initial first stage of learning, matching the word with its meaning and its maybe spelling and pronunciation. It does not help you with the more nuanced things, its second meaning senses, its collocations, colligations, its use in context. All of that stuff has to come from incidental learning. That's extensive reading. So the thing that we're really missing here in our language programs is a systematic program of intentional learning. And I'll just explain to you why that's important. One of my students some years ago, she looked at the learning of Korean-Japanese word pairs. And she made lots and lots of cards, the Japanese-Korean word pairs. And she did 30 minutes of learning for 30 days. At the end of 30 days, she had attempted 640 words. But what she was doing was carefully doing set 1 first, then set 2, then set 1, set 2, set 3, set 1, set 2, set 3, set 4, and systematically going back. She wasn't randomly going set 4, set 12, set 15. She was systematically building on previous learning. By the end of the month, I took all the words off her and I tested her on every single one of those words. 490 words were learned in a month. And I tested her a month later, and there were I think it was 395 words were known a month later. And then I tested her 7 months later, and 310 words were known. So this shows extremely strong learning of that, just that form-meaning relationship. And to me, it's an absolute crime that we don't have more and more people doing this. So ER plus what, for me, absolutely number one would be systematic vocabulary learning. With a really good program. So you can see here that there is a similar kind of parallel to the previous diagram I showed you that had the textbook plus lots and lots and lots of learning with extensive reading. Now, what that diagram is doing is building the contextual knowledge, building the collocations and so on, in the same way, with the same principle as the diagram we're looking at now, which is doing the same thing for the intentional initial stage. So we need to make sure we have program learning at the initial stage and program learning at the deeper stage as well. Does that answer your question, Ivone?
Yeah, sort of. But still, like in Indonesian context, I mean, like, how do we do this? We don't have much time. Like, there are so many words in English, right?
Yep.
And then students, when they graduate from senior high school, they should be at B1 level. So at B1 level, how many words
that's what the government says, yes.
Yeah,
but
that's what
just
the
not
government
what's going to
says.
happen, of course, right? You see this all over Asia, these ambitious goals that the ministry sets. When you actually look at what the students can do, they're not even close, not even close. And you find countries competing on their curriculums with each other. Oh, China's just increased it, let's increase ours. It's like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. So we're way, way, way off with the amount of hours that we need to get to B1, B2. We're just not going to get there. So you said that we don't have time to do this. Well, my question would be, if you want to save time, do intentional learning. It's extremely fast. So if you compare an hour of let's say, incidental learning. This is a study one of my students did some years ago. She had students read for an hour with certain keywords put into the text, right? And she did a cross design where they had two texts and two sets of words. And she had other students learning the same words intentionally from a word cards in the same way. It was 16 times faster. 16 times faster to do intentional learning. So if you say we don't have time, well, just put the intentional learning into the class at the beginning. So one way to do this, an obvious way to do this, is if you're going through your course book and you come across a new word, get yourself a piece of paper, write the new word on your card, write the back in Bahasa Indonesia, whatever, and put it in an envelope. And that's your word bank, right? And you can then start learning that way. Better than that is to use apps. There are several apps out there now, like Quizlet. There's actually an app that I have called Word Learner that's systematically doing this for schools. It's free, so I'm not sort of plugging my boat there, but you know, I think this is absolutely doable. The problem is that many people hate memorization, right? But you only have to do it in short bursts, 5 minutes at the beginning of a class. And I ask my students when I go into the class, either you're reading your graded reader or you're doing your word class for the first 5 minutes. And you know you're going to get some learning from either way. So it's absolutely doable, and we need to have this. And if you want to get students to learn those words for the curriculum fastest, do the intentional learning first. Because once you've got that intentional learning, you're then able to recognize it in your reading texts. And let's say next week you've got a unit on, I don't know, let's say sports. The week before, you give them 20, 30 word cards with all the sports. Learn these words because you're going to need them next lesson. Instantly going to save a lot of time. So it's just a matter of getting it stuck into the curriculum.
Right, but this is like learning when I was a student in high school.
And it's a crime of not doing more of it. It's crime, and that's why your English is so good.
Probably because I did the hard work back then, right?
Yeah, that's right. But
I remember doing an ER course in which we had two options. You know, like there was a reading box, and so we learned, you know, words from cards, just like what you said, and we read books. So we have two options, like
and both are good, and we need both. Yeah, one's for the initial stage of learning, the other one's for the deeper stage of learning, right? And one without the other is not going to really help, because we know that picking up words incidentally, new words incidentally from reading is really slow, particularly at the advanced level. When you get to the advanced level, students already know so much language. They have to read a lot to find something they don't know, right? So when you get to the advanced level, extensive reading is not a good way to learn vocabulary. It's good for other things, but you're not going to pick up much new vocabulary from extensive reading when you get to the advanced level, because it's just too inefficient. You have to go back to intentional learning. I'm talking about new words. I'm not talking about, you know, all the deeper aspects of knowledge here. So it's a challenge for sure.
Hold on a second, I'm running out of battery.
Oh my gosh, that's no good. I'll have to carry on without you. Plug in, please. Save me, save me.
No, that's just the battery.
Okay. So my turn for a question for you. If we are to adopt a systematic ER plus approach to the language teaching, do you think we need to change teacher training in some way? Do we need to change some of the essential competencies that we need to do we need to have teachers adopt in their classes to effectively implement ER plus, whatever that would be? Do you think we need to retrain teachers, or can we sort of just, we're okay where we are, just do more of what you learned in Teachers College? What do you think? Hello, are you with me?
Yes. It's a
Are
hard
you thinking?
question.
Sorry.
It's a hard question.
You want to pass on that one?
No. Can you ask me the question again? I was in the middle of switching my headphones.
So do you think, well, if we are to adopt an ER plus approach, however we define it, do you think we'll need to retrain our teachers or train them differently? Or can we deal with what training we've already done and just make sure they implement it well? Is it an implementation problem or is it a training problem?
Well, if I contextualize that in Indonesian context,
sure.
we need a different way of training teachers.
Okay.
Yeah, because, but this is recorded and this is online, right? I'm not supposed to say something bad, right?
No, you can say whatever you like, but
right.
we can edit if we need to, as Sandra, right?
Yeah, because we keep on doing things based on what the government thinks is a good idea. We don't listen to teachers, and we don't go, sit with teachers and talk to them and then ask them what they really need. And in the context of ER, it's also quite similar, It's like we invite them to come to us, and then this is what we know about ER, and then you go back and then try to implement it.
So I found that too. When I was doing teacher training, there was one of my very best students. Her name was Ekemi. She picked up every idea that I had. Every idea, she picked things up. She did additional reading. She was so good. She did all of these lesson plans, were really excellent lesson plans and all the rest of it. And she did a cracking thesis that I wanted her to publish internationally. This was an undergraduate thesis. It was that good. It was brilliant. And she was an excellent student. I thought, wow, it's real pride as a teacher to have somebody come out of your program that you at least have contributed towards her knowledge. And I went to go visit her in a school. She was doing grammar translation. This is the best way to teach. It's like, what did you learn in my class? It's like, what the heck? I said, well, that was fine. I thought, well, maybe that's just a one-off thing, right? And I went back to visit a class again and again. It was all teacher-centered. She was speaking in Japanese, asking people to repeat after me. And this was still hadn't got out of her head that wasn't the only way that we should teach. So yes, some people are totally impervious and you think you're doing a good job. So it's a long, long, long road we have in front of us.
Yeah, because university is like a lab, it's like a laboratory in which we do things in ideal contexts. But then once they have to go to real classrooms, the condition is so different. And the easiest way of dealing with this is actually to be pragmatics,
Yeah. It may well be that they just model on however they were taught. My teacher taught me that way, therefore that's the default. All this stuff in school was great. Oh, well, I just get my license and I don't have to worry about it. We go back to real teaching. I think it's a real problem. But one of the things that I found very gratifying about my years in extensive reading has been the number of people who've come to me and sort of said, ER saved my life. Oh, thank goodness it has purpose. It makes sense. The kids love it. Countless people have found that ERs really, really helped their teaching, something that they felt they just were not making any headway for. So you do see the opposite as well. But I think there's only a certain type of teacher willing to accept and to open their minds to something new. And there's quite a lot of people I know of all persuasions who are just not willing to change, no matter what. No, you can give them any evidence that you like. You can show that there's been a benefit, but they no, I'm just going to continue what I'm doing because it's nice and easy. And you see that particularly here in Thailand. There's a concept called sabai sabai, which means take the easy road. And so you talk to people here and you talk about extensive reading. Is it going to be good for your program? Yeah. You're going to do it. No intention. Thank you very much. No.
It's too difficult. Yeah.
It's not just too difficult. I can't be bothered. Thank you. I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing. It's been successful up to date. I've got all my lesson plans. I'm just going to stick with my lesson plans. Why do I need to upset my life? I think it's a real challenge. And I think we need to focus on that issue. If we're going to develop an ER Plus framework, we need to do that, be clear what our framework would be, and have the principles behind that so that we've got something to teach, and those principles need to come out. And I'm not talking about, this method or that method, because as you know, in our industry, we're beyond methods now. We're, communicative language teaching died years ago. It's no longer the right approach. It's one of many. So we can pick from task-based learning, we can pick from CLT, we can pick from audiovisual, we can pick from grammar translation, and it's how you pick those and your principles that are underlying what you're doing. That's the key. So when you look at that list of principles that I showed before, you say, okay, these are the things I want to focus in my class. What's the best way to get there? Well, extensive reading is the best way. Or tomorrow we're going to do translation because that's the best way to achieve that goal. Or we're going to do memorization, or we're going to do this. So having that set of principles in your mind and knowing how to react to each of those principles, I think is probably the way forward, but it may or may not change minds, as you saw before with that, Kimmy.
Yeah, and with ER, perhaps it's easier to actually convert teachers who have experienced ER or extensive listening or reading or viewing when they were young, you know.
Yes, particularly those who come from families who read, yeah.
Yeah, but most teachers don't have that experience.
Well, partly because well, particularly where you are, there's financial problems, right? You don't simply get access to materials, and that's something that everybody listening, that Ivone and I are trying to fix. We've got the GRAIN project. I put the link into the chat box before, where we're trying to develop graded readers for Indonesia to basically give away, because the publishers there in Indonesia are just not making any effort to get these things available for people. So we have to write our own. The other issue is that we don't have many books which are written with Indonesian sensitivities. It's a predominantly Muslim community, and therefore in class we need to focus on some of the issues that reflect Muslim values, and of course Christian values as well. You're a Christian yourself, right? So we need to be very much aware of the Indonesian values, the concepts, the culture, because I don't think there's one graded reader ever been written that's got an Indonesian name in it, right? So, and that's a problem. Same with Japan. There are very few books that have got Japanese names in them. And that was something I tried to address in our page turner series. So yeah, we absolutely need to do that. But if we have the right materials, hopefully, that make life a lot easier for us. We should probably open the floor. We've been nattering away for a while. We've got half an hour. Sandra, do you want other people to chip in?
Absolutely. Though, I mean, we're absolutely enthralled with what you're talking about at the moment. But if anyone has got a question that they'd like to ask, now will be a good time to...
Okay, I'm just going up the top here. Recycling grammar vocabulary built into ER. Chris, yes, you'd mentioned recycling grammar vocabulary is built into ER. Yes, certainly at that deeper level of knowledge, and hopefully at some of the intentional level. But I still think that for intentional learning, that is just the full meaning level. Memorization is great. The problem is that memorization is not fun, so you have to make it fun in some way. Lots of short bursts. So it depends on how you define grammar and vocabulary there, Chris. Do you have a comment on that?
No, I just felt that I personally would much prefer to read endless graded readers in a language I'm studying than to do boring spaced repetition. I regard spaced repetition as brilliant for test preparation, as I produced one for my granddaughter, but she hasn't come back and asked for more.
Yes. Again, it depends. If you could make it into sort of games which are fun, you know, it doesn't have to be just simply, you know, look, do I know it? Do I not know? It doesn't have to be that. It could be Pelmanism games. It could be spot the word game. It could be, you know, shoot the definition games. There could be games that you could play which would be a little bit more, that is actually spaced repetition, but the kids don't know it. It's more like fun games. There are games you can play that can do that, but the principle still stays the same.
I'll try.
Anki is an excellent app. SSRS, yes, it is. The problem, I think, with Anki is it doesn't have teacher support. I don't think Anki has something where the teacher can log students in, the students do their stuff, and you can track what every student's doing. You can't do that individually, I think. Am I right there, Kimberly? I think Anki doesn't do that. From a teacher's perspective, you can't really control that. You can just throw them at the app. Is that correct? Are you there with this, Kim?
I believe that is the case. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But which is why I use Quizlet, because it does have teacher support and you can track what your students are doing within the class.
Yes. And it's the reason that Charlie Brown and myself some years ago made an app called Word Learner that does exactly that. So we have various word lists which are embedded in the app, and a whole teacher's side where you can set up a class, set up learning for the students, give them a set to learn, get a code, you're learning set A, B, C, D, whatever, and they learn it and you download all of the data. So we dealt with that as well. We're not as well known as Quizlet and the other, but there are apps out there will do this, I think. Ed, what student device? I just more explicit funding is it?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to clarify.
Yeah, I was going to say, could you walk us through that a little bit? I'm just trying to read it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So I guess we're getting a bit off topic from extensive reading here, but that's okay. So
you're not talking about Plus, so that's okay. You're
not talking about
okay.
Plus. Yeah. So I've had a couple attempts to get my students onto flashcards, and so my first idea was, okay, let's do the app. And so I thought, okay, I'll see if I can get them permission to use their devices in the evening self-study sessions, because it's a boarding school and they're in the class in the evenings. But no go, couldn't happen. I thought, okay, try doing it on paper. And so I bought very cheap sets of flashcards on little metal rings. I said, okay, write your words on that. And every couple of weeks I check back on them. It's like, you must have 20 words on there by this week. You must have 30 words by this week, etc. But you choose. Too much freedom, way too much freedom. They were taking it wherever they wanted to, and they were putting whatever words they wanted to on there, which is usually nothing. Or they had no idea what words to choose. And so for middle school, that was too hard.
Yeah, they're probably also, they may not have been doing it systematically. They're probably just randomly going through the words. And, the enemy for word cards is this, because what that means is every word comes in a system. You need to break it up into group and group and group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. And because you're just going to pick it up and randomly end up where you are. And it's all random learning, right? So the enemy is the system. And many teachers don't know this. And therefore, I mean, you do clearly. But without a system and understanding and explain it to the kids, they're just going to learn randomly and it's not going to be successful. Or teacher, I tried, it wasn't very good. And that's a problem with us.
I think systematic is the word of the day.
Yes.
That's kind of a big takeaway for me. And it's not that I didn't know, but that was not integrated into that idea to begin with. And when you're talking about both with the extensive reading thing and with the spaced repetition thing and with all the other activities, I think the systematic really matters. Yeah. But I want to finish my vocab story real quick.
Can I just before you do that, if you don't mind? So one of my students at Thammasat, is a PhD student. What we tend to find is you get these questions, they get this research comes out, which is better, intensive reading or extensive reading, right? To me, that's a completely false way of looking at it. To me, it's a nothing question. It's like asking, which is better for carrying a cement, a Ferrari or a cement truck? I mean, cement truck, right? Because it's designed for that. And so where you see these studies come out trying to compare intentional versus incidental learning, it's just like, what are you doing? They're completely different constructs. Intentional learning is good for something. Incidental learning is good for something else. And one of my students is actually going to be looking at not, whether the two are in competition, which they're not. They're completely different constructs. She's looking at what's that balance between the two, how much intentional learning you need to do before you move to the incidental. And so I think that's probably something filling on what you said is what's that balance between the two. So I think it's really key that we structure our research looking at, understanding the constructs. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So the final iteration of my flashcard system was that I would set up the account on my Anki account, and I would put it on the big screen at the front of the class, and I put all the words that they're supposed to know in there, and we just go boom, boom, boom through them. I put up the picture or the definition, and then they say the word. And so it's, they see the definition of the picture, they say it. So it's production. I'm getting the pronunciation, and if most of them know it, okay, you learned it. If most of them don't know it, do it again. And I just do it like that. And it's such a compromise because it's not individualized. Everyone's doing words that they probably already know and this kind of thing. There's a lot of issues with it, but it was valuable enough for the students that are not going to do the work outside of class that I really think that it did make a big difference. Everyone knows what the baseline is. But the thing is that, like extensive reading, this is something that really works best outside of the classroom. You don't necessarily need the teacher there to do it. If you know what to do, then you can just do it by yourself. And so I felt really like torn about it. I'm like, I'm doing something that I know is super inefficient, but it's a compromise for the situation. And I think that's a valuable thing to think about with ER+.
before I mentioned with, the idea of a piece of card and you put it into an envelope, I call it a word bank. And so at the beginning of class, another alternative activity I do is say, hand your word bank to the other student, right? And now try and make sentences using these new words, right? Or you could have someone testing you. So you'd say, the definition is this, what is the word? And so if you can play little games like that as well, I think can also help. Even at that memorization, there's lots of games, the things you can play. And I think Greg's got his finger up, is that right? Pointing to heaven, Greg.
At the risk of sounding negative.
Go ahead.
Yes, it needs to be systematic, but most of us, some of us, are working in a flawed system where there are actually no concrete aims and no specific learning outcomes or objectives. Compromised further by far too little time on task for the giant job of language learning to actually happen. So if the social, the institutional, the whatever mechanism is creating that many gaps, then I think all we end up with is some people doing some slightly better or more principled efforts on a small scale for better affective satisfaction feelings, but that the actual measure outcome of learning, simply by the nature of the situations and systems that we're put in many cases as teachers, is so inherently flawed that we're just dog paddling just to keep afloat a little bit, but not much forward traction is going to be achieved by students.
True. I can see that, but we do see some development, and we see a lot more. I'm seeing a lot more people more able to speak now than they were when I first arrived in Japan. Go to the average convenience store. There's a few of them got a few words now. You go to Thailand, most of Thailand, the other day, I just met a couple of people. They could have a little bit of a conversation. These are 17-year-olds, right? And that wasn't the case years ago. You show them a bit of reading, they could probably read something. They've got a little bit of language, a bit more than they had in the past. You go to a convenience store now in, say, Korea, you're going to get pretty much fluent English from quite a lot of the people behind the store, behind the counter there. Not all of them. Go to Indonesia, particularly in the more popular places. You go to Thailand, I mean, all over the place. I've been here 7 months now. I've hardly had to say a single word in Thai because you could just get by with all kinds of stuff here. There's lots and lots of people here who can speak some English. Yeah, admittedly, they're the ones who are in the retail situation, but I don't think it's quite such a bad thing. I think it's if we embed them into a system where they need to use the language, then I think that would make a difference. And the problem with school is it's artificial, and we don't really have it embedded into the culture. We don't have the kids going, right, you now need to do 1 month service in a department store to practice your English. We don't have that. We have it for teacher training, right? Go off to a school and train, but we don't embed students actually in the environment, which you could do in Thailand because you'd stick it in front of a hotel, for example, right? So I think it's that practical side of things. They don't seem to see use for it, and therefore it's not connected to me. And I think we need that practical, it means something to me side of things.
I understand that. The follow-up to that, though, is we often talk about these exam-centered cultures and these teacher-fronted things, and that we have that element. The part that I don't understand is why under those systems has the structured vocabulary study type approach that you were talking about, that is so inherently in favor and matches with those type of approaches. And that's one of the things why I don't understand that hasn't been anchored in history by domestic teachers even before people like me ever got here.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I was a kid back in school, somewhat a couple of 100 years ago now, and probably Chris is around my age, I guess. When I was back at school, the way we'd learn literature was memorize a poem. Just go memorize the poem. There's a test on it, and however many mistakes you make is minus points from your score. You just memorize and memorize and memorize. So, there has been practice in the past, at least in my education, of memorizing poems or memorizing pieces of literature. And there are friends of mine who can still recite the poems today, So there's something to be said for it. And I think we undervalue it a bit. It got a very bad rap when memorization became out, when audiolingualism was replaced. Oh, we're only doing audiolingualism. Oh, that's just a very surface level processing. We need deeper cognitive processing, blah, 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 blah. And it got poo-pooed and moved out of favor, which is a huge mistake, because the stuff that replaced it now we realize is also a mistake, at least done just by itself. But we still got that legacy of, behaviorism. Oh, that's no good anymore, right? And it's very, very powerful.
I mean, I brought up the word eyebrow the other day in French from elementary school study from, 45, 50 years ago. And safe to say, I had not used the word eyebrow in French since leaving French immersion grade 6. So it was interesting from a personal note to understand where some of those deep core fundamentals are. And I just feel at times, I wonder whether the question is ER or ER plus, or if we simply need to push for that full list you have of what makes a good language teaching learning program.
Yes. Or have a
And
good
if
shot
people
at it.
buy into that, then all the various elements kind of get folded into it.
Yeah. I mean, don't misunderstand me. When I was teaching in Japan, I couldn't get all that into my program. But it wasn't just my responsibility in my class. It was the responsibility of our department to have a framework that did that. Well, we don't have collaboration. In my 29 years at my university in Japan, not once did we have a collaboration between the teachers to talk about our curriculum and how we're going to work together. Not once, despite so many efforts to try to get something. We had no idea of the relationship between first year, second year students. Oh, just move them on to the second year. When I got inherited second year classes, I had no idea what they'd done in their first year. I know what, if I taught them, I know what they did. No idea what the other teachers did. It was a complete lack of problem. It was a problem because we were not dealing with things systematically. And the concept of curriculum in Japan is like, just for them, it's a list of courses, right? And the assumption is, just take them on a year forward. What does that mean? So I hear your pain. I hear your pain. Is that elsewhere? You find that Chris and Ed and whoever else is from overseas?
And Ivone. I was going to ask,
yeah.
like, nodding away. Ivone, please add your 2 cents to this.
Yeah, we experienced the same situation. Well, at one point, I remember 2014 or something, we tried to develop this extensive reading course in which everything is supposed to be, parallel, like we have grammar class and then vocabulary lesson, reading and listening, all of the language skills, skill courses. But it was so difficult to put them together so that everyone can go, synchronously. It's very difficult. So we finally gave up and basically use whatever we can use, because it's just too difficult. At first, we want it to be idealistic. It's like whatever comes in the grammar class should be recycled in the other classes. The idea is that it's a very good idea, but when it comes to realizing those ideas, it's a completely different thing.
And even when you get a teacher who agrees to the principles, they're still going to do it the same way, like we saw with Ekemi. Oh, I'll just do grammar translation because that's the way to do it, right? So this is why, working with professionals that are adaptable and flexible is such a key.
And why teacher training is so important.
Vital.
So especially you're saying like being a teacher who has been teaching for 15 years, 20 years, whatever, or much longer, you have that knowledge, you have that ability to be able to have that overview, whereas the new teachers don't.
Yeah.
Trying to find a way to pass that knowledge on to the next generation, specifically when it comes to extensive reading, not just being an add-on, but being a core part of any curriculum. It's kind of I guess it's really up to the more experienced teachers to try and find ways to find that way to pass on that knowledge, which I guess is what we're kind of doing now a little bit. So, yeah.
I would slightly change a word that you used. You talked about teacher training, and that to me has a kind of a top-down approach where here's the knowledge, go off and learn it. I think we need to adopt a teacher coach approach where I'm sitting with you in the classroom, really with you, watching what you do, small groups, 3 or 4 students that you're working with, visiting their classroom, working with them on a day-by-day basis. This is, I believe, the approach they have in places in Scandinavia. They have a really intensive program, and look at their educational system, right? And we don't adopt this coaching approach, which we have in baseball, we have in hockey, we have in all the other things, but we don't do it in education. That to me is just, why don't we have a coaching approach, not just a teacher training approach? Because just telling people, do this, do that, do this, do that, is not really going to help them. You actually need to be with them in the classroom. I mean, if you look at Japan, the teacher training, my university, you only had to do 3 weeks of practicum to get your license as a language teacher. 3 weeks. And that was like, watch 2 other classes and do 2 of your own. And because you were trying, they're going to pass you anyway, right? I mean, that's woefully insufficient. It needs to be a 2-year, 3-year process of really intensively building people. And it's just the wrong model, totally wrong model. Very depressing. Sorry about that.
Has anybody else got any questions or comments? Now
complaints.
Complaints.
I'd like to toss up an idea that I had earlier when we're talking about how to conceptualize ER+. And I think that if we're thinking about like, oh, is there time for it? Where can we put the plus in the course? Are we going to make more time for it, etc., etc.? I think that if you have your ER program set up, chances are, in most of the models that were put on the screen before, the ER is quite separate from the day-to-day classroom teaching. So you have your 4 skills course book, and you teach them the reading part and the listening part and the whatever, and then you have your ER somewhere else, maybe in class, maybe out of class, doesn't matter. But if you have that ER happening, that means that the students are going to have their influx of books, maybe teacher prescribed, maybe student chosen. Again, it doesn't matter. But you have a resource, and the resource is what the students have been reading recently. And so you can tap into that resource to bring the ER+ activities into the classroom. So for example, if you want to do your book talk, you say, well, read something on this theme, and then we're going to do our themed book talk 2 weeks from now. So they've got like an incentive to go and pick something in particular, maybe step out of their comfort zone. And so you can guide it in that way, or you can just draw on whatever they've been doing. And so I think that's a comfortable way to not get overwhelmed by the idea of throwing ER+ at a bunch of teachers who are thinking, oh, where, how, what? Right.
So another solution to that, I think, is to have the ER even not part of a class, have it part of a curriculum. And by that, I mean, like, all first-year students do this. So the easiest way to get it into a school, I think, is well, particularly where you have resistance, is to make it a requirement at the curriculum level. All first-year students will read 60 books this year, right? And just put it into the program, and you'll be assessed somehow, however it would be, volume, test scores, whatever. Even if it's not really the principles that we want, because if you find resistance from teachers, it's not going to get done. But you could put it at the curriculum level and just check once in a while, every Monday morning, how's your reading going? And no more than that. If you try to integrate it, that might bring resistance from some teachers. If you're in that institution, bring it in at the curriculum level, independent of any courses. The problem with that, of course, is you want to have it tied to a grade, right? So that's one way that I've seen a few programs do this. I'm working with a school now in Thailand who's going to adopt X reading, but they don't want to bring it into their classes. It's too much trouble. So we're going to have it implemented at the curriculum level.
I believe that works better with junior high school and high school. And I think, yeah, a lot of the Japanese private schools have it embedded in the curriculum. Whereas for university, I kind of imagine that it's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, the problem with universities in Japan particularly is every teacher is allowed to be king or queen unto themselves. Just do whatever you like. You know, if you go, it's your course, you do what you like. The problem with that is everybody does everything they like. Take the case of the linguistics in my department. We have 3 linguists in my department. Every single one of them, it is English linguistics. Every single one of them is doing Chomskyan Japanese linguistics in the English department. There is no mention of cognitive linguistics, psycholinguistics, historical linguistics, corpus linguistics. They don't hear social linguistics, psycholinguistics, not even mentioned once in 4 years at the university, because they're allowed to do what they like. It's a crime.
Ivone, please tell us it's better in your neck of the woods.
Well,
as much as you can say, you know, yeah, safely.
Yeah, well, teachers have all the freedom to do whatever they want in their own classrooms, right?
Mhm.
But I just want to comment on Ed's ideas earlier. I've tried doing extensive reading and extensive listening. So the extensive reading as a separate course and extensive listening embedded into a listening course. And it is actually possible, you know, like we talk about one topic in class, and then I would give my students a chance to explore that topic using videos and then stories and find things that are related to the topic that we talk in class, and then we're back to class again. And then I also try to do series listening. So 1 week, I assign my students to listen to the first part of the story, and then the next meeting, we will talk about the story, you know, like, and then we go on to the second section of the story, and then so on, second series, and so on and so forth. And that will go for 10 meetings. And it works because the students feel that they're actually doing something fun. And then we relate what they do outside of class with something that they can do inside of class. So perhaps that's an idea.
So can I just look at the questions in the chat box there? Kimberly mentioned something about AI. Would you like to, if you're still with us, would you like to? It's just I'm concerned about reinventing something using AI. Could you sort of elucidate on what your concerns are? Kimberly, there? You still with us?
That was just in relation to Chris making an app in Claude AI. Yeah, no, it's nothing major for the chat.
Okay. Because AI is a big thing recently, as you all know. Yeah.
We can do lots of things with AI, but now I'm a bit concerned about, you know, like whether our students will speak like AI, like
I
the
have
impact
seen it.
of, yeah.
You know how
Scary.
AI has like a style if you don't give it
Yeah.
extra instructions? It has a writing style that it defaults to. I was thinking about, because one of the other teachers in the department was saying like, oh, my students have written this with AI. And it's like, how can we really be sure? Because if they learn their reading from the AI, that's how they learn English to be like. And so they're going to start talking like the AI. That's just a theory. But anyway,
Yeah.
I've just been at a conference over the last couple of days here in Beijing, run by TCA. And the theme was AI, and probably about 75% of the presentations were about AI, or at least integrated it in some way. And Dr. Willie Renandia, also an extensive reading guy, he had a great presentation about how technology needs to be done in a principled manner. And he says you can throw as much tech as you like into the classroom. It's not going to make a lick of difference unless you've done it according to principles, such as the ones on Rob's great big list before. So that's another good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you know, AI can produce a lesson plan, right? You say, give me a lesson plan. I'm used to. It can do a lesson plan. Is it any good? Probably not, because AI doesn't understand language learning principles and doesn't certainly understand your classroom, right? And what your students know and what they don't do, right? If you are a teacher who is doing the mechanical side of teaching, like here's a new word or here's a piece of grammar, AI can do better than you. It can teach grammar better than you, it can teach vocabulary better than you, but it can't understand your classroom. And it doesn't really understand how tasks are built. If you give you some kind of a text, comprehension questions, and follow-up stuff, but it can't build, it doesn't understand the nuances of how lesson 1 would be tied to lesson 2, to lesson 3, to lesson 4, building and recycling. There's huge problems with it. And you see, I saw teachers, some of the teachers at a university I visited recently, they use AI to generate lessons for their students. A lesson plan, please, on this, and it spits out a text, words, vocabulary all over the place. And you think, oh my God, you're teacher trainers. What the hell are you doing?
Kimberly, do you want to say that out loud, or do you want to just leave that in the in the text?
I didn't name the university.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I think one of the areas that gets overlooked in the initial needs analysis that teachers, curriculum directors, program directors, was the point that Rob made about the metacognitive thinking. And I think there's so much influence from individual differences for the learners that we meet at the chalk face, and those past learning experiences that they have. I think it's really, really important to have some type of mechanism to support teachers to better understand what those students actually need, whether it's a higher dose of structured, focused language learning, whether it's support for autonomous learning. If the students aren't in the right spot and the teachers paint them broadly with the same brush, then I think there's always a danger of some incompatibility there. So somehow that art and science of teaching, and I think this becomes a problem at times when we're interpreting the research that comes out as to who were the subjects of that research and where were they at on their learning curve, and what past learning experiences had they had, and what individual differences had they developed individually or collectively as a group that then could be dealt with in terms of some type of treatment. And I think we need to refine a lot and to replicate research in different contexts with different ages and learners and cultures. But I think there's a responsibility to better understand diagnostically what the students can do, can't do, and then to create a bit of a priority list as to what are the first, second, and third things that are going to kind of help develop some traction, as opposed to the teacher going to a webinar, hearing a kind of an interesting idea, and, oh, that sounds really whiz bang, and maybe this will be the breakthrough that helps overcome the doldrums that my students show up with sometimes. And so I'm going to latch on to this as the silver bullet that's going to solve all needs. I think there's, from a neuroscience point of view, from a metacognitive point of view, from a self-realization point of view, I think there's an underpinning of educational psychology that a lot of educational theories or practices or attempts don't necessarily tap into as much as they should.
And I would add to that, we don't really train our students enough to be able to think properly, to be able to understand how to learn properly. I think this is a fundamental misunderstanding. For the last 29 years at my school, I said the very first course the students should have is learning how to learn, right? And we never got it implemented. Never once. I had one lecture once about 20 years ago. And students are not born knowing how to learn well. We need to, how to use a dictionary properly. How do you find stuff in the library? How do you write an essay? What's an essay structure? Learning how to learn. We just don't do enough of that metacognition stuff. It's a crime. Another one.
That is absolutely spot on. I'm going to stop the recording at this point. We can continue our conversation, but just so that we can have a nice round end to the recorded section. So thank you very much to Ivone and Rob. And so much to look through again when we watch it on YouTube. And thank you so much for participating.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much.